We are 3 races into the NASCAR Cup Series season, and so far, the most predictable thing that's happened was the rain delay during the Daytona 500. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove Race Review Edition. We are talking all things Dixie Vodka 400 from Homestead-Miami Speedway. I hope you enjoyed this weekend's racing action. It was action-packed. We're not going to talk about the Xfinity Series race, but that race featured just about everything you could hope from a NASCAR event. Featured underdog performances, heartbreak, spectacle, triumph, all that great stuff. We're not going to talk about that though. Today we're talking about the NASCAR Cup Series event, which I think after Saturday's Xfinity race, many of us expected to be a letdown. But a letdown it was not. No. This race was full of surprises, full of great action. We're gonna talk about here today. We're gonna talk about the top finishers, the race winner, of course. I'm gonna talk about some of the most notable storylines because there were so many surprising performances today, some good and some bad. Of course, at the end, we'll put this race on the Groovy gauge, so stay tuned for that. I wanna start with this. A couple years ago, there were rumblings about the future of Homestead-Miami Speedway being uncertain. You know, in 2019, it had just been announced that it was losing the championship weekend for the first time in years. They were moving it from its finale spot on the schedule to a much earlier portion of the schedule, and many fans began to speculate, and not just fans actually, I'll say members in the media as well, were speculating about Homestead-Miami Speedway's future. Could it be the latest track to bite the dust? Thank goodness, at least so far, that has not happened, because Homestead-Miami Speedway proved once and for all this weekend that currently it is the best mile-and-a-half racetrack on the NASCAR schedule. That goes for trucks, Xfinity Cup. It's fantastic. Multiple grooves, a wore-out surface that isn't as slick and slidey and virtually undrivable as Atlanta, but still wears out tires, creates great fall-off throughout the course of a run. Tires matter. There are so many good things I can say about Homestead-Miami Speedway. I wish I could take this track and just put it in like a time-locked bubble so that it never changes and nobody can touch it. Because unfortunately, as is just the nature of these things, the surface will one day get too wore out. You know, they're gonna continue tearing down grandstands, hopefully not. Tracks always are gonna change, but man, if it was possible, if science could do it, I would want this version of Homestead-Miami Speedway effectively frozen in time for generations of racing fans hopefully to enjoy, because this track is fantastic. If every mile and a half on the schedule was like Homestead-Miami Speedway, the more short tracks crowd, the more road courses crowd would be much quieter than they currently are. But Homestead-Miami Speedway, as it is, it's basically a diamond in the rough, especially since Chicagoland Speedway has been effectively taken off the schedule now. It's a fantastic racetrack that allowed for some great racing this weekend and also today, because today was the first race of the season. Well, I guess Daytona technically is 550 horsepower, but this was the first race of the season that featured the controversial 550 horsepower high downforce rules package that debuted in 2019 that has fans extremely polarized and seemingly shifting more and more towards the negative every single week. This race, however, was perhaps the best the 550 horsepower package has looked at an intermediate track since its debut. Some people will mention Kansas in 2019. I agree, that was a fantastic race. That one's probably still a notch above this one. But boy, I think today's race is at least in that conversation, because throughout the day, yeah, dirty air came into play. Dirty air was discussed on the broadcast, but dirty air, because Homestead allows for 3 or 4 different grooves, dirty air is not quite the obstacle it is at other racetracks, because drivers, the trailing car, has options. They don't have to follow the leader directly in his tire tracks, get in that wake and get all tight. No, they have room to work. We saw so many passes today, and particularly, we saw a lot of passes for the lead under green. Chris Buescher by himself made 3 passes for the lead under green. We'll talk about Chris Buescher in a moment. But that shocked me. The last year or so, when I've watched these high downforce 550 horsepower races, I have like a knot in my stomach more often than not, because sometimes, you know, there's good moments, some fun, exciting racing, but you still just, it just doesn't feel right. I didn't have any of that today. I still don't love this rules package. Last year's race at Kansas, ironically, the 2020 Kansas race kind of ruined it for me completely. I was in the give it a chance, let's see what happens crowd for a while, and then I kind of became neutral on it for a long time, and then that race last year effectively, you know, I'm get rid of it, change it, tweak it, we need something better for the next gen car. But I'm not gonna ignore great racing when I see it, and today was a great race. I thought, you know, because handling still played such an important factor, we still saw the best drivers run up front. We still saw great action throughout the field, and that includes the front of the field. So, you know, today's race was really, really good, and I'm not gonna be blind to that because I don't love the current rules package. It was great racing today, and anyone who disagrees, I don't think saw the same race. We'll talk a little bit more about the finish of this race once I put this thing on the Groovy gauge here shortly, but for now, I wanna talk about the winner, and I wanna talk about the top finishers because there were some surprises, some negative and positive surprises. Let's discuss. Firstly, congratulations to William Byron, grabs his first win of the season, just his second of his career. So we didn't quite extend the first time winner streak, but very close, about as close as you can get. Byron's second career win, first of the season, also his first win now with new crew chief Rudy Fugle. Remember, Rudy Fugle joined Hendrick Motorsports this past offseason after spending the last several years with Kyle Busch Motorsports in the Truck Series. This was just his third race with William Byron, and they are already in victory lane. That spells trouble. If you're the rest of the field, you should take notice with what William Byron and Rudy Fugle did tonight, because they were dominant. Basically, from the second half of this race to the end, they were untouchable. Aside from the run Tyler Reddick tried to put on at the very end of this race, but too little too late. Aside from that, nobody had anything for William Byron, really, once he got out front for the first time. It smells like William Byron is poised for a breakout season. Of course, he and Rudy Fugle had success in trucks several years ago, so this isn't their first time ever working together, but it's the first time Rudy Fugle has worked with Byron at Hendrick Motorsports, and for them to find victory lane in convincing fashion so early the way they did tonight, that is important to note. And if we look ahead to the playoffs, which I know are still, months away at this point, you look at the three winners we have, that playoff bubble is going to be interesting. Three different winners to start the season, and they've all been from drivers that I think we assumed coming into this year would be right there near that cut line. Christopher Bell, I think a lot of people were, he might make the playoffs, he might not. William Byron, he barely made them last year. Michael McDowell, I don't think anyone had making the playoffs this season. Those three drivers with wins are virtually locked in. It's still early. We could see 16 different winners before the end of the regular season, so I'm not going to rule anything out completely. But now with those three drivers grabbing wins, that really puts the pressure on other, bubble drivers, guys like Matt DiBenedetto, who barely made the playoffs last year. Guys like, honestly, Ryan Blaney, who's kind of in a points hole right now, or Ross Chastain, or Bubba Wallace, drivers like that, who we all kind of assume will be in playoff contention, but maybe aren't shoo-ins to make the playoffs the way like Hamlin is. The more bubble drivers like Byron, Bell, and McDowell who win, the more pressure it puts on those kinds of guys. So today's win has more than just implications for William Byron. It has implications for the rest of the playoff field and playoff hopefuls here down the line. So important to note that. Let's look at the rest of the top finishers. Watching this race, it felt like anyone could win, and I have not had that feeling watching a Cup Series race at an intermediate track in a long time. This race felt, until the very end when Byron was running away with it, this race felt wide open. Of course, Byron gets the win. Tyler Reddick, we have to talk about Tyler Reddick. He was surprisingly quiet in the first half of this race, but once the track cooled off, once it got dark out, he found that high line that we all expected to see him run, and he rocketed through the field. I was trying to keep track. With about 18 laps to go, he was like in 6th place, like 12 seconds behind the leader. 18 laps to go. He made up more than 8 seconds on the leader in the final 18 laps, drove all the way up to second, so kudos to Tyler Reddick. I was listening to his radio. He was angry when he crossed the line second. He was more angry than excited, because he felt like if he didn't make some mistakes early in the run, he would have had enough time to catch William Byron. And honestly, 5 more laps, I think he beats William Byron, or at least gets alongside of him, and then who knows what happens from there. So credit to Tyler Reddick. We all expected him to run well tonight. Same with Kyle Larson, who finishes 4th. Both of those drivers who've had success at Homestead in the past lived up to expectations, at least by the end of tonight's race. But it was topsy-turvy because Larson, he also was not always at the front of the field tonight. He fell back to like 10th at different points. Byron was consistently near the front, especially the second half of this race. So was Martin Truex Jr. He was near the front pretty much all night. Kevin Harvick, early in the race, fell out of the top 15, but he was mostly in contention tonight. I gotta talk about the Roush cars in just a moment, but first, Michael McDowell, 6th place, 3 straight top 10s to begin the season. And this is a mile and a half. Like, okay, Daytona, anyone can win, and he had the push. He made the move in the last lap to get the win. Last week was a road course. McDowell's historically been good at road courses, so yeah, top 10, not out of the question there. But at Homestead, a typical mile and a half, no. Coming into the season, nobody had Michael McDowell picked as a top 10, top 5 threat at an intermediate track. But here we are, just 3 weeks in the season, 3 straight top 10s. According to what I saw, he's, I believe, 4th in points right now. After 3 races, Michael McDowell. This team was like a 30th place team like a year ago. What is happening? Credit to Michael McDowell, man. Obviously they have momentum, maybe a slight performance or budget boost thanks to winning the Daytona 500. I have no idea, but either way, deserves a huge round of applause for his performance at the start of the season. It's a dream season. They said it during the broadcast. This is a dream season so far for Michael McDowell. Who saw this coming? Kurt Busch finishing 8th after pitting with a loose wheel with like 40 laps to go. I don't know how he drove back up to 8th. I guess fresh tires really mattered that much. He was running like 4th when he had the loose wheel, so still lost a few spots there, but great resilience from Kurt Busch. Let's talk about those Roush cars. Ryan Newman finishes 7th. A little bit further down, unfortunately, Chris Buescher. Chris Buescher ends up finishing 19th, but he was the show throughout the first half of this race, winning stage 1 in convincing fashion. For a moment there, for a moment, a fleeting moment, Roush Fenway Racing looked back. I mean, I was having to clean my glasses off because that 17 car looked a lot like the 17 car that won in 2007. He drove up not once, but twice and took the lead away from Brad Keselowski. The Roush Fenway Racing hasn't been able to do that in years, so wow, credit to Chris Buescher and that entire team. Newman was up in the top 10 most of the night. He obviously held strong and finished in the top 10. Shows what a difference a veteran driver perhaps makes compared to a still younger driver like Chris Buescher. Buescher's team, once the track got dark, they seemed to fall off a cliff, honestly, quite literally, almost. There was one restart early in stage 3 where I think he was like 5th, and then he just dropped like a rock by the time they got to turn 2, and I think he was 20th just a couple laps later. So unfortunate that the finish does not show how strong he was early on in this race, but no, he did. It will go down in the history books as he won stage 1 and led like, I think more than 50 laps. Like, I'm not just saying he just stole the stage 1 on a restart. No, he drove to the lead and drove away with the lead for a while. I don't know. I still don't know how to comprehend that. I mean, hopefully this is a sign of good and better things to come for Roush Fenway. Now they just have to learn how to put a full race together, but that was a good sign. That was impressive. So round of applause to Roush Fenway Racing. At least Newman got a top 10 out of it. That's great. Denny Hamlin bounces back to finish 11th. He was one of several drivers, including Corey LaJoie and Alex Bowman, who had to start this race from the rear after making unapproved adjustments. Hamlin was struggling out the gates. It took him a while to crack the top 20 and took him really to the end of stage 1 and not until stage 2 to even flirt with the top 10. Of course, at the end of stage 2, he almost won that stage, put an aggressive block on his teammate Truex that ended up costing them both the stage when allowed William Byron to win the stage instead. Truex was unhappy with Hamlin, and for good reason. But Hamlin was consistently at that point a top 5 threat all night long until a speeding penalty late in this race forced him to restart in the rear. He drove back up to 11th, so again, decent comeback for Hamlin, but could have been a whole lot better. I want to talk about this briefly because I think a lot of fans were viewing this race as maybe the first opportunity to set a baseline. You know, what teams are strong out of the gates, which teams have room to catch up. You know, Daytona's Daytona, and then the road course is kind of a specialty type of track, but an intermediate, which, you know, there are still many intermediate ovals on the schedule, is a great opportunity to kind of gauge where teams are at. And after watching tonight's race, this is what I talk about this race being unpredictable and topsy-turvy. I don't have any idea which teams have fired off best to start the season. Like, you could say Hendrick because their driver won the race and another one of their drivers finished in the top 5. That's great, but Alex Bowman, you see him barely sneaking to the top 10. Chase Elliott was strong early on, but ends up finishing, what, 14th? I mean, not terrible, but certainly surprising. Okay, so you could say maybe Joe Gibbs Racing. You know, Martin Truex Jr. gets a good top 5. Hamlin was a top 5 threat much of the night until that speeding penalty, but then you look at Kyle Busch, who was berating his new crew chief, Ben Bayshore, over the radio for much of the first half of this race. They scrapped things together just well enough to get him somewhat competitive here towards the end, but certainly Kyle Busch did not have a good night. Christopher Bell was not competitive at all tonight either, so even Joe Gibbs Racing kind of hit or miss. I could talk about Penske, who were fast early on, but all their drivers, Logano, Keselowski, Blaney, struggled late in this race. Blaney was taken out by Eric Almirola, who tried to clear himself in the middle of the corner. Don't know what Eric Almirola was doing, so bad break for Blaney, but he wasn't running very well before that anyways. Stewart Haas, even Stewart Haas was all over the place. Harvick was bad, and then he was good, and then Cole Custer actually was the face of the franchise for a while there. I don't know what happened to Custer. Maybe he ran out of fuel because he was up in the top 5 or 6 until the last few laps. I saw him drop. I did not see what happened to him. TV did not mention it. But like Eric Almirola wasn't that great, and then he wrecked himself, and then Chase Briscoe was like outside the top 30 with some damage early on. They battled back to get a top 20 finish, so good resilience there, but Stewart Haas, hit or miss there. So all the teams, is what I'm mentioning, all the powerhouse organizations had up and down days. I don't know how to gauge any of these teams. I don't know who's fired off well at this point. So much for setting a baseline. Homestead did not do that today. It's all up in the air at this point. I have no idea who's good and who's not right now. Really, this whole season still feels up in the air, especially when you look at the 3 drivers who have won so far. As they joked about during the broadcast, if you had told me just a few weeks ago that Michael McDowell, Christopher Bell, and William Byron would be your 3 winners to this point, I would have called you crazy. Everyone would have called that person crazy at this point, but here, that's where we are. That's where things stand. So we'll go get them next week at Las Vegas. Maybe next week we'll start to get an idea of who's trending positively and negatively. Maybe, probably not, probably not. Anyway, lastly, thank you all for sticking with me. Let's put this race on the Groovy gauge presented by Swan. Yes, well, you already heard my piece at the very beginning where I talked about how much I enjoyed this race, how this felt like an old school mile-and-a-half race, and was honestly one of the best performances I've seen with the 550 horsepower package. I don't really have a lot of bad things to say about this race. I mean, sure, it didn't end super dramatically. I mean, I'll admit, Tyler Reddick coming from 12 seconds back to 3 seconds back in the closing laps had me on the edge of my seat. I didn't think he was going to get to the lead, but heck, watching him fly up to second, at least that was extremely entertaining. There's some dry portions in the middle portion of the race where long green flag runs, drivers were pulling away, field was extremely spread out. Sure, that was a little bit dry, but what kept it interesting were the names up near the front of the top of the list. Chris Buescher contending, McDowell contending, Reddick contending. That made this race a lot of fun in my opinion. So overall, a very good NASCAR race, an extremely good intermediate race, and I would say an extremely good race with this somewhat restrictive 550 horsepower rules package. I'm going to give today's Dixie Vodka 400, I like that name, at Homestead-Miami Speedway, a 90% on the Groovy gauge. I thought the broadcast did a great job of highlighting a lot of the battles throughout this race. When Chase Elliott almost wiped out in front of Kyle Larson and Brad Keselowski, that had me on the edge of my seat. There was a few other examples of that. That crazy block Chastain tried to put on Matt DiBenedetto. I don't know what he was doing, driving a little over his head right there, but that was exciting and Fox was able to capture that. So I think the broadcast helped. We didn't miss a whole lot of the most action-packed moments. Maybe I'm just relieved that this race didn't suck after yesterday's exciting Xfinity Series race, first race with this package. Maybe I'm just relieved more than anything, but I'm giving this thing a 90%. Heck, I'm feeling good. Let me know what score you would give this race on your Groovy gauges. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We review NASCAR races, we talk NASCAR news, rumors, predictions all throughout the week, and a whole lot more, so be sure to subscribe if you are not already. Always a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. Could not do this show without your support. Plenty more to come this week. I'm mostly moved in now to my new studio, my new setup and everything. Still some things perhaps moving around behind me a little bit, but I appreciate you all tuning in. I appreciate you all watching. Thank you all for the support. I will see you later this week. Have a great rest of your Sunday night, folks.